Somehow, I realized I was thinking about this yesterday. We've never met in person, despite being quite close geographically. Because you're based in London, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, based in London most of the time. I live in Italy, but work in London. The office is in London.
That actually answers something I want to ask you for personal curiosity. Because I noticed through your LinkedIn post that you do spend a lot of time, or have spent some time in Italy recently. So I was going to ask you what brings you there, but I guess you answered that question. You actually live there.
Yes, in Naples, just outside Naples. So near Vesuvio National Park. Yeah, so just outside there.
So does that give you access to a lot of interesting places to visit, environmentally speaking, and from a nature perspective?
It's wonderful. There are some extraordinary places from a historical perspective. So Colano, Pompeii, just down the road. And then you've got the entire Gulf of Naples, all the beautiful islands, the Amalfi coastline. Yeah, extraordinary location, really. So very, very lucky to live here and seen a lot. It's been really good experience.
Let's dive into your story and story of your business. And when looking at stories of businesses and entrepreneurs, in many cases, they end up being presented or at least perceived as overnight successes. When in reality, there may have been 15 other ideas that failed before finally getting to one that actually worked out, or what appears to be the results of, say, one decision or one successful move is actually the result of multiple little steps, failures, and learnings over years of work. Looking at your story, one could be tempted to paint a romanticized picture of a trained lawyer who was unfulfilled with his career, quit his job to follow his passion, and started a successful sustainability consultancy business. What are we missing here?
Well, pretty much that's kind of the route I took. As you mentioned, I qualified into law in 2016. Seems like a very long time ago now. But my real passion, my interest, and the real purpose I saw with my life has always been in marine biology, marine conservation, and also in working in nature and conservation. And I guess the more I worked in the private sector through my career, and the more I had experience of working with entrepreneurship, innovation in the biodiversity and nature sort of sectors, the more I saw that I really wanted to set up a company to really bring those two worlds together. The private sector with all of its knowledge, wealth of experience, and resources, with also the entrepreneurship particularly in nature and biodiversity, which is a very emerging market away from traditional sort of NGO-based thinking when it comes to conservation. Now thinking about more setting up scalable businesses and approaching it from a commercial and a nature impactful way, and how we can leverage both these two incredibly interesting and diverse worlds together to really scale and move things forward in the right direction. And I guess that's really the impetus of the business, is to act as almost as a conduit between these two very different sectors.
Going back to the beginning, did you actually stop working as a lawyer, solicitor, and immediately went into all in as a business owner, or was there a transitioning period of sort?
Yeah, there was a transition period. So when I did my training contract as a solicitor, I did 4 different seats, and my final seat was in corporate law. I then qualified into corporate law in Devon, in Exeter, where I'm from. I did a year in that, and I'll be honest with you, I really didn't enjoy it very much. It was kind of soulless. I learned a lot, and you do get a huge amount of experience from when you're working on transactions, and you have a lot of responsibility. But at the back of my mind is, I always knew that this is not what I wanted, the direction of where my life, I didn't want to be a partner in a firm in the Southwest. I had much more exciting things I wanted to do. And entrepreneurship was really at the heart of, I guess, my passion for nature and marine biology specifically. And I think when, especially in law, it's once you're in, it's very difficult to get out because you have a career, a good career. You start off on a reasonable salary, and every year you become more qualified, you have more responsibility, you get a better salary, you get a pay increase every year, and you get used to that way of life. And it's very difficult, for people to actually leave the profession, which I think is a great shame because I think there are a lot of incredibly talented and ambitious and great people in working in law, but haven't yet found their passion, haven't yet found their, what they want to do in their lives. So I always remember when I was working on a healthcare transaction, and this was about sort of maybe 9 months into my qualification, and I was with a senior partner, and I remember her telling me we came back and we left at 2 a.m, some obscene hour. We were working on documents and board minutes and authorizations, and it was very boring. Anyway, she was telling me that she always wanted to set up a care home. That was her passion, but she realised that she got so far into law with a senior partner that she got to such a stage in her career that it's almost impossible for her now to make that transition. And I always thought it's a great shame, she has a real passion in something she wants to do with her life. And obviously, I'm not saying law is a brilliant career or a brilliant profession, but I think what I saw was that I was lacking any real meaningful purpose. And I think purpose is such an important impetus to have in your life. And I saw that if I don't get out now, I'm going to be sort of stuck here. So within, I guess, as soon as I qualified, I set up my own marine conservation NGO, which was called the Conservation Project. So I had that. I started doing blog posts about different areas of conservation. This was at a time in 2016 where not many people were really talking about nature and biodiversity, and really in the private sector, it was almost unheard of, apart from the sort of CSR departments, etc. So I got more engaged and more involved in doing that in my own personal time. And then I made the move, very bold move actually, I think about 9 months in. I handed my notice in and I took up a job as a volunteer coordinator in the Maldives for a small NGO working on a tiny island called Nefaru, the Maldivian island, about a 4-hour speedboat ride from Male. And I worked and I sort of left my job. And then I packed my bag up and moved to the Maldives for 4 months and spent an extraordinary time there working with the community, Maldivian community, who were the most wonderful people, but really seeing firsthand, the real impact that climate change is having on the coral reef that they have there, on turtle populations, the huge impact of plastic pollution and the dangers of that, and how a lot of these island communities really face extinction unless we try and mitigate the really impacts of climate change. So that, and the time I was building up my NGO as well at the same time, I knew it had to obviously come to an end, back to reality of going back to London, finding another job. Managed to get a nice job at Client Earth, which is a really brilliant organization. Worked there for a year. That was a brilliant experience. And then I went back into private practice. I joined a law firm called Hogan Lovells, which is a brilliant law firm, and was part of their business and social enterprise practice. That was another great experience because that enabled me therefore to have a kind of purposeful role. And the aim of that role was that we provided pro bono and low bono legal services to social entrepreneurs. We helped train junior lawyers in things like the SDGs, introduce them to the concept of social entrepreneurship, and also work closely with in-house counsel clients of the different firms' clients as well. So that was a really great opportunity to, again, build those connections with the private sector, really understand how the private sector works, how the private sector is looking at things like nature, social entrepreneurship, biodiversity, but also then to try and build a company around, as I mentioned at the beginning, sort of bridging those two worlds together and helping to create a sense of purpose as well for people working in these organizations and connecting them directly to incredible experiences and incredible entrepreneurs where they can learn from. And so it's been quite a journey.
Yeah. So that sort of transition into different different roles. It sounds like they were a sort of mix between your low background and something that was a bit more impactful and sort of and gave you a bit more purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the legal background is a great framing to learn about company law, learn how to set up your own company and give you that confidence in building relationships with clients and working on major different things at the same time. And then actually having that, part of entrepreneurship, I think, as you mentioned at the beginning, it's not easy. It's really tough. So unless I think you're exceptionally passionate about the subject matter you're working on, it can be overwhelming. But luckily, I love this stuff so much that actually I really enjoy my job now, and I really enjoy running a company and working with the people I do. So I think having that interest, having that passion, really does help really move you forward, and having that private sector backing as well enables you to think quite commercially about decisions that you make.
Yeah, I often ask about what advice you might have for entrepreneurs that are getting involved in the seaweed industry or in sort of maybe aquaculture or even sustainability in general. Of course, the audience is very much focused on seaweed and the seaweed space. I'll go straight into the follow-up question because it's a good segue from what you just said. How do you think about striking the balance between environmental impact and making a profit, running a business successfully?
The future I see for a lot of businesses is exactly that. Having a business model which is commercially driven and can drive profit. I think we can look at profit in a number of different ways. For the businesses, the type of businesses that we work with in the seaweed industry and other blue economy businesses, some of them may not be making a profit straight away. It's not like a simple tech venture capital route. This is something which is quite capital intensive, requires a lot of upfront R&D costs, and will take time to develop those markets that we hope will take off, for example, in seaweed. So having that scalability, having that roadmap as well and how you communicate that with investors is really important. But the way I see in aquaculture, in regenerative farming, in biodiversity monitoring, all of these different new industry areas around nature and biodiversity, the ones which I think will do well will have a commercial purpose, will have services which they can leverage upon to generate revenue. And at the same time, the more they generate sales, the more they generate revenue, the more greater impact they're going to have. So they almost work side by side together. I think a perfect example of that is looking at Oceanomics. That's been a really successful business in what they're doing. They have a really great route to market, and they also have the biodiversity and nature impact as well of what they're doing. So that almost like a regenerative business is what I find really interesting.
What are the maybe unconventional or specific elements that you think made it work really well?
Yeah, I just think the idea is it's pretty genius. They're addressing a huge issue around kelp deforestation, which is overgrazing sea urchins. They've established a route to market, which is for the urchin itself in a high-end food restaurant market and seafood market. And then once you remove the sea urchins, the kelp can then regenerate pretty quickly, and it can bring back the biodiversity that was missing, and it can store lots of carbon and can recreate those incredible habitats which we're losing all over the world. So it's a pretty cool model, I think, now.
What are some of the other interesting and promising business models that you've seen in seaweed or the blue economy in general?
Yeah, there's some great ones we work with. So we've run our third program now, working with our ventures on in the blue economy. We've seen some brilliant ones around technology. So I think Safety Net Technologies, it's a really cool startup which we work with since our first program, and they've gone through a great journey. I think they've got a brilliant product which is helping to catch cam, for example, is a really cool innovation they've created. They're trying to increase precision fishing and reducing bycatch, but now they're looking at ways around biodiversity monitoring as well. So they're really smart the way they've looked at that. We've worked like Stream Ocean is another really cool underwater camera business which we worked with on our last program. We've got some great businesses which are looking at the nature and biodiversity high integrity markets. So Credit Nature was one, which is a phenomenal business, and I think they're going to do very well. They were on our last program. On seaweed specifically, we've got on our new program, we've got some really cool seaweed farmers in Africa, which we're really excited to work with. In the Seaweed Cafe in Tanzania, Holy Blue in Kenya, and also in Spain, Ficosera, which is a really cool Spanish seaweed company. So we're really excited to see how these different sort of jurisdictions are utilizing seaweed and the different community models, the different scalability models they're using. We've done a lot of work in the UK as well with seaweed farmers. And I think the UK offers, in Scotland, there's a lot of great work going on. In England, there's some brilliant, amazing entrepreneurs. But I think in England specifically, there is a lot of support, which I think the industry needs. A lot of barriers and challenges. I know we'll go on to talk about this later, where I think programs like ours and others working on this are really trying to see how we can really sort of scale up and support these entrepreneurs. So it's been a really interesting process. Yeah, absolutely.
And have you identified any sort of common patterns or, common denominators that run through these different businesses and make them special or successful?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's to do with the founding teams and the way in which they're able to build, like commercial relationships, both with investors, but also with like corporate partners, and the way in which they're able to build networks, get themselves out there, really be an advocate for seaweed and the uses that seaweed can have. I mean, if you look at the growth of kelp blue, for example, it's been quite extraordinary. The amazing success they've had, the award they won recently at COP28, and just the storytelling and everything that they've done and the work they're doing in Namibia has been something to really look up to in terms of the seaweed and kelp industry. I think also a lot of them, we're seeing a lot of challenges as well around off takers, around, especially in Europe, finding buyers for seaweed. I think which routes to go down. There's so many different uses and applications for seaweed, whether it's in biostimulants or in animal feed, in packaging. There's so many different routes. And then also I think in just the upfront R&D costs and the times and challenges around licensing, leasing, and getting support, I think, from the government, which is something which I'm really been advocating for a long time. And education. I think education as well, Fed, is huge. Education around front corporates. We have this huge buzz about seaweed. It's been everywhere, hasn't it? But it's really around the education of the reality of the market and how we address those pitfalls and challenges to enable that market to really scale. And I guess a correlation you can look at is like the electric vehicle market, for example. You're seeing now in Germany and others in the UK as well, we've got a lot more electric battery, companies opening, because we know there's a demand for electric vehicles. We have a regulatory oversight, even though it got pushed back in the UK to 2035. But the government is putting money into, research and development. There's a lot more collaboration between government, private industry, different stakeholders. We're seeing a growth in that market because we know that's where we need to go. We have almost that infrastructure and that framework for that market, becoming successful. And I think that's where we're lacking in the seaweed industry in the UK specifically, is that we need to create that market infrastructure and that education between different stakeholders to really bring them together. So yeah, that's obviously that is a bit of a blocking point.
From the point of view of the entrepreneurs sort of coming in, this might not be the best approach, so feel free to question that. But in terms of bang per buck, what are some of the best applications for seaweed in order to have a positive environmental impact in the near future?
I think that's a really interesting question to look at. And we're looking at on our new program, we're specifically looking at the applications for seaweed for land farming, so specifically probably biostimulant market, which there's some indications that that's going to take off hopefully. Again, it's one of the it's a tough question to answer, I think, without really truly understanding. Looking at it geographically, you're looking at it from how each jurisdiction is approaching it. and then looking at what those advantages are, the links to upcoming regulation and policy around sustainability, disclosure frameworks, incentivizations for agricultural companies and food businesses to maybe look at the application of seaweed in regenerative farming, and then actually understanding from the entrepreneurs themselves what their journey is and where they see are those potential opportunities, what momentum they've had in developing those discussions with potential clients and investors, and really what those common themes and challenges are. So through our program, we're really hoping to tease out some of those ideas and challenges and solutions and opportunities, and really get a better view of, just through the ventures we've been working with from different jurisdictions, where we see those potential market opportunities. Yeah, so we're in those early stage thinking. I mean, you've obviously got like Noppler and Flexi. They're doing great work in the UK on, replacing microplastics and plastics with seaweed. I think that's amazingly cool. If that takes off, I think that'd be fantastic for the world. And, finding a replacement to plastic and microplastics through seaweed. If those industries are able to take off, that's hugely exciting. But I also think the ones in agriculture are transformative, if they can work and if they can be applied in a way which really does tease us off, animal feed, tease us off fertilizers and chemicals for the way we generate our food.
It seems like the perfect time to go into the Regenerative Farming Accelerator program. Before we do that, for people who might not know, could you give us a quick snapshot of what Bright Tide is, and who your customers are and what you guys do in a nutshell?
We do two things really through Bright Tide. We're a sustainability consultancy company, our core. We have two main offerings. One is around advisory services. So we work closely with financial institutions, law firms, FGMC companies, insurance firms, where we provide services like doing workshops, upskilling programs for employees, education, employee engagement opportunities, and then developing programs for companies around nature and biodiversity. So quite a bit of our work is on that consultancy side. And the other part of the work which we do, which communicates and interrelates quite a lot with the first strand, is these accelerator programs which we run, which is providing an avenue for entrepreneurs to have access to free pro bono support from big private sector organizations, whether that's in law, in sort of investment readiness, marketing, PR, but also helping to connect entrepreneurs directly through the networking events that we run in London to potential customers and supporters of their work. So we've run three. This is our third program, Accelerator program we're on at the moment. We ran our first program specifically on the blue economy, where we supported 12 organizations working across the blue economy, from fisheries to aquaculture to shipping and to offshore wind. And the way our programs work is we have three different pillars for them. The first is around convening those networking events. So we will normally host them at a quite exclusive venue in London and bring together between 80 to 200 people per event, offer the entrepreneurs the opportunity to speak at each of those events, and then have a networking and drinks reception after. And that's been a really powerful way to almost bridge together those two worlds, which I mentioned at the beginning, and hopefully open up, interesting discussions, new contact relationships. We then have the 8-week virtual program, which provides about 1 to 3 hours of pro bono support each week for the ventures. And one of the things also which we really enjoy doing is building those relationships between the ventures themselves. I think probably one of the most powerful impacts of the program is that each of these entrepreneurs, they haven't had the opportunity to sort of connect and work together through the program, can really get to know what everyone's sort of doing, leverage off each other's network, but then also potentially maybe work together on, joint funding bids, introduce each other to potential investors. So that, building that community and ecosystem with entrepreneurs themselves. And that's a really powerful way of doing it. So we run that through sort of peer-to-peer sessions per week on the program. But then working with our delivery partners who support the program and providing hopefully really interesting and relevant workshops and seminars, and making it tailored specifically for those industries as well. So what we know blue carbon program we just finished last year, which we ran with the Crown Estate, Ogan Lovells and Young. That was really cool because that was specifically focused on blue carbon. So all of the sessions we had were relevant just to blue carbon entrepreneurs. So those entrepreneurs that were working on blue carbon solutions, hopefully the sessions are really relevant and interesting for them. And having that in-depth sector knowledge and providing those services to the ventures as well, I think is really helpful. We then finished the program on a showcase event. So this is an opportunity, about a 2.5-minute pitch to potential supporters, customers, investors in the audience. And we normally do that at a financial institution. This year we're doing it at Barclays in May for the Regenerative Farming Program. And that's again another opportunity to sort of showcase the business that the ventures are working on, and hopefully to meet new potential, supporters and investors. So we made a program free for entrepreneurs because I know it's hard, especially working in Seaweed and things like that. And we wanted to really leverage the support from our private sector partners and getting them to provide the expert sessions as a way of building that bridge, really, and having the onus on not only entrepreneurs but on the private sector who have the more resources. So yeah, that's really the way we run the programs.
It sounds really, really promising, and I'm looking forward to see how that evolves. Have you found that there is a specific area where these companies and entrepreneurs, they need support with?
Yeah, I think legal advice is definitely not to be understated. It's so important to really everything. If you think about, your company, when you're setting up a commercial relationship, having a good commercial agreement in place, when you're thinking about IP, whether that's in trademarking or protecting your brand, protecting your design to an innovation. So think about patents and things like that. Thinking about even having such simple things like a shareholders agreement in place when you have new investors coming on board, and having good legal advice on transactions when you're raising investment. I think legal advice is so important. And also when it comes to things like, and I think this is where there's a gap as well in potential legal knowledge, is around things like applying for licensing and releasing applications, that kind of process that seaweed farmers have to go through with the MMA, with the Crown Estate. Having some support, experts, technical support there to help as well. And then maybe that's not done through a law firm, maybe that's done through a more technical consultancy firm. And also really interested.
But it's a gap.
I think it is a gap, yeah. And I also think thinking about things, future potential markets around biodiversity credits or carbon credits as well. And thinking how, as a venture, you have a seaweed farm, how in reality does that look like? So from a legal perspective, how would you draft in an agreement around allocation or ownership of those benefits? So I think that's also where law can play a really important role in making things watertight, sort of de-risking things for entrepreneurs.
And I guess it's not something that when you set out to build a seaweed related or impact focused company, you probably, the legal framework and then the legal stuff that has to be done. It's not something that you think about initially, and it's not part of the sort of sexy image of I'm going to create a seaweed business of some sort.
No, not at all. I would totally agree with you. It's something which many entrepreneurs, don't even think about, but it's really important. And also just thinking about the way in which law and regulation is developing, especially in the European Union and here in the UK, with new disclosure frameworks like TNFD, for example, all of the new regulations on sustainability disclosure from the European Union, and things like the Global Biodiversity Framework. And all of these, in terms of building that connection to the private sector and the way the private sector is looking at nature, is looking at within that supply chain, changing unsustainable practices to sustainable practices. These are all avenues and opportunities I see, things like seaweed farmers who are producing things which are potentially more sustainable than the way we've been doing things. So really understanding what those drivers are for private sector to really be engaging with seaweed farmers, I think is also something which we like to speak about on the program, because it's helping to build that overall value proposition for a seaweed farmer or for an oyster farmer or shellfish farmer. So yeah, I think having that bigger picture view.
Yeah, on that, is there any tools or resources that you would recommend for people to sort of start getting stuck into that sort of area that might be a bit neglected and get an initial understanding, other than obviously hiring a law firm and or working with a consultancy? Is there anything that people can sort of get a taste, and any sort of useful tools or resources that you found?
Absolutely. I think just going, if you go on the TNFD's website, they've got, and I don't work for the TNFD, so I'm not, I'm not promoting them, but I think they've got a really great knowledge base on there around nature disclosure and what the framework is. It's called the TNFD, the Task Force for Nature Related Financial Disclosure.
Okay,
It,
we'll
it
put that
only
in the show
came,
notes.
yeah, it only came into sort of promise last September, and it's voluntary at the moment, but essentially it's creating a voluntary disclosure framework for companies to report on and act on nature-related risks and opportunities. So that's interesting. I think the European Union has loads of really good, if you just type in European Union sustainable rules and directives, you can get a really good overview there. We're actually going to be doing a lot more work on this on through our comms. So having some sort of toolkits and guides to the different like nature disclosures and nature rules, which would be really helpful. So there's also, I mean, there are pro bono law firms out there. So if you can find pro bono legal support if you're looking for legal advice on these specific issues, and they may be able to help. So Thomson Reuters have a really good pro bono legal advisory part. HL Base, which is where I used to work with Pogo Novels, they have a pro bono offering where you can get up to 6 months pro bono legal support through one of their programs and sort of an ongoing pro bono legal support. Yeah, I can maybe send you some more links which might be quite interesting.
Definitely, yeah. That'll be great. Thanks. Obviously, the focus of the program you talked about, regenerative farming accelerator program, is regenerative farming. How is regenerative farming a key area to fighting the climate and biodiversity crisis?
Well, so what we wanted to do on this program is tackle the term or the phrase regenerative farming from not just a land perspective, but also from an ocean perspective. So every single conference I've been to on regenerative aquaculture has just focused on land regenerative solutions, whether that's agri-tech, rewilding, working with farms. But one of the things we've always neglected is actually there are so many interrelations as to what happens on land and what happens in the ocean, and also so many opportunities around ocean farming. So we've cut the cohort this year in half. We've got 20 organizations, 10 are focused on land-based solutions and 10 are focused on ocean-based solutions. And what's interesting about that is actually there's so many opportunities for farmers to work or trial, validate biostimulants or other, seaweed or other applications in the ocean, whether that's in freshwater or actually looking at things like biochar, looking at the impact of nitrogen runoff, nutrients, all these different things, which is happening through intensive agriculture on land, goes into our sort of river systems and then pollutes our coastal landscapes. Yeah, we're really excited about that, and having this sort of wholescape approach to how we view nature and potential markets in nature as well. I think it's super important. Also, this whole point around regenerative from both land and ocean. We're also looking at this from sort of a climate mitigation adaptation process as well. And then this doesn't apply just to farming. I think this is just my thinking as a whole is that if you go back to our blue carbon program where we worked with mangrove ecosystems, seagrass ecosystems, and salt marsh ecosystems, the ecosystem services which they provide to land are ginormous. These amazing mangrove ecosystems in Indonesia or all across the world, they're playing such a vital role in reducing the impact of climate-related disasters. Coral reef ecosystems, for example, are really fundamental to communities all across the world because they absorb and they help mitigate against, typhoons and other climate-related disasters. They're a lifeline for, billions of people that live around the coast around the world. And you look at seaweed as well, with the biofilters and hopefully the way it can, oysters, the purification, the way they can help improve water quality, all these different services which ocean, different opportunities can provide are really important to the way we look at things. That's why we've really focused on both. We want to bring those two together, those two worlds together, And also each of those two paths has totally different networks which people can tap into and hopefully move things forward that way.
How do you think about the relationship between sustainable aquaculture or, ocean farming and regenerative farming on land? Are we looking at two sides of the same coin? And if so, why is that important?
Well, it's a really good point. I mean, again, this is really program. We really want to understand, are there common challenges that are facing both on land and in the sea? And if so, then how can we jointly, approach those? And what is the legislation saying? What is the incentives for both of those industry areas? Because it also ties in around this is around food security. We're facing huge issues around the world at the moment in terms of deforestation, in terms of the degradation to our natural world, but also the world is becoming more polarized, sadly more diverse place. If you think about where we are, the war of Russia-Ukraine, the issues around grain and the food security issues which face there. So if I'm an investor investing in agriculture or in food, actually maybe investing in a jurisdiction which has both a sustainable approach to land food management and also ocean food management as well, where we're not depleting the resources, we're approaching this in a way in which hopefully these industries are going to be around for the next 100 years or so, then that offers me a long-term investment opportunity. Whereas at the moment, the way we're cultivating things on land and in the sea as well, is that there really is not going to be much left in the next couple of decades. So this is almost a change in the way we're looking at food security and the way we source food and the potential long-term impacts of still having these industries around in generations to come. So I think when we look back at the different businesses, we've got these two amazing farmers on the Isle of Wight who have just started a regenerative farm maybe 3 or 4 years ago. They're doing a really amazing role. They have a similar thing for seaweed farmers. So they're tenant farmers. So they have a landlord. If you take the UK, for example, the landlord's the Crown Estate. The tenant is effectively the seaweed farmer. So they have that same relationship. Then there are certain things they can and can't do. How are they approaching natural capital opportunities to diversify their revenue on land? Okay, interesting. So we can learn from them, their approaches, what they've done. How could that therefore be applied in the ocean if it's working well? So, we're already starting to build these sort of similar opportunities, these similar approaches that seem to work on land. Can they work on the ocean? And through building that knowledge of both these vital resources when it comes to each country, hopefully we can move things in a way which is, much more sustainable for future generations.
Okay, so very quickly, I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the sort of low-hanging fruits in terms of possible synergy between land and water, between sustainable aquaculture and regenerative farming? I'm thinking of biostimulants, for example. It seems like an obvious one. All the nutrients from land are going to the ocean. We can get it back from the ocean, bring it back to land. That seems like a no-brainer, right? Is there anything else like that, or have you got any thoughts on around this?
I think also aquaculture is a really interesting one, not just seaweed, but also so we're seeing a growth coming out of the US in land-based aquaculture farming. So that's using like RAF systems on land as opposed to out in the ocean. But there's some issues around, salmon farming, for example, in Norway or in Scotland around, fish escaping or least and everything getting on the fish and, sustainability issues there. So what's really interesting is looking at how land-based aquaculture could potentially provide a more sustainable solution. So that's one. I think the interrelations between land and oysters are really interesting. So the way in which oysters can play a really important role in improving water quality, in nutrient neutrality laws, which are in the UK. There's also new markets coming. We've got the biodiversity net gain legislation on land, which is happening. And now there's going to be...
Is that in the UK as well?
That's in the UK, yeah. We're looking at the marine biodiversity net gain legislation, which is around where developers on the coastline will have to provide if it's the same as the land, it will have to prove a 10% increase in marine biodiversity on the impact they're having on that potential site. So legislative routes are quite interesting. I think carbon is quite an interesting route for carbon developers. So there's a lot of groups now like natural capital consultants or natural capital groups, which are working with landowners for carbon accounting and natural capital ecosystems that store carbon. So salt marshes, for example, probably the most far advanced on marine blue carbon ecosystems in the UK, and the role they play with storing carbon, but also you've got wetlands, so around the biodiversity part of that story as well, which is on land, but also has a connection to the ocean. An amazing organisation which is doing this really well is called the Australia Seaweed Institute. They're an impact partner on the new regenerative farming programme, but they've got a hugely ambitious project up in Queensland near the Barrier Reef, where they're building a number of seaweed farms which will act as biofilters from land and agriculture pollution, because the coral there is impacted not only by bleaching and through climate change, but actually through the pollution in the waters and invasive species as well coming into those areas. So the seaweed, yeah, as well as sort of storing, like methane and other greenhouse gases, can act as a biofilter, can filtrate the water to improve water quality issues. And that's really interesting, I think, from a land perspective in the UK and an ocean perspective. We've seen terrible horror stories of, water companies and sewage just, pouring into our beaches, into our coastal areas, where it's just awful. I mean, you go swimming in sewage, pretty disgraceful. And that impacts fisheries, that can impact tourism, it can really devastate communities. Also with algae blooms as well. So, saga, which is now washing up in all over the world, from the Dominican Republic to Mexico, and we'll probably see it, coast of Africa, we'll probably see it here in the UK. So that's really caused, a lot of that is caused through land-based agricultural runoff and pollution. So the connections, there's so many connections if you look at it from a whole-scope approach, as opposed to just looking at it from a singular approach. So I think, building those together and thinking about market opportunities and thinking about the net benefits that could have to both land and ocean, I think are quite smart ways of looking at it.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's really interesting. I would love to go into the practical ways that could work, but I'm conscious of time. So we might have to do that another time, because I wanted to zoom in for a minute, zoom into a specific aspect of the blue economy, particularly in relation to aquaculture and seaweed, and that's the investment landscape.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the state of the investment ecosystem around seaweed? Particularly, it'd be interesting to understand what you think is currently working and what you think is not working, or if you see anything that is missing.
I mean, for seaweed specifically, I think it's a really important discussion to have. And I think the way we learned this is actually speaking to seaweed farmers themselves, and learning about, okay, what kind of financing do you need? What kind of investors have you reached out to? What has been your success rate of, is it venture capital investors? Is it more impact driven investors? Is it more family offices? Or is it blended finance, which takes in maybe debt financing with a bit of grant financing? Is it patient capital? The answer to that, I think, has to come from the seaweed farmers themselves and really understanding what type of financing they need. As I mentioned in my discussions with a lot of seaweed farmers, is that actually when you first start a seaweed farm, you need a lot of R&D financing in place to set up your infrastructure, to pay for overheads, to pay for equipment and assets, whether that's boats, whether that's putting the lines out, whether it's then establishing a biorefinery plant. They're very expensive to set up a seaweed farm. It takes a lot of costs, and you have to find investors that are aligned with you in your mission and in your story. And I think there is an enormous amount of investor education that we need to do that actually, look, this is not going to provide you at the moment with returns straight away. This is a market which we still need to establish here in Europe. We still need to set up the infrastructure, and it's going to require a cross-sector approach to get there. It means working with government. It means working with local communities. Stakeholder engagement is absolutely vital for the future of seaweed farming around the UK. It's working with the fishery groups. It's working with the boating community. it's quite complicated. There are a lot of stakeholders in place before you can even set up your seaweed farm. And then once you've got the seaweed farm in place, it's then thinking about, okay, we've got some investment in place, which sees us give us a run rate of, let's say, 2 or 3 years. Over those 2 or 3 years, we now have to establish, revenue. We have to find customers, and we have to build in off-takers and potential, clients for the seaweed that we're producing. And that is, again, that takes time and it requires support. And that's what we try to do through our program in the best way we can for the limited amount of time people come on there. It's to really try and help understand what are those barriers that you're facing and how can we be of use? How can we work with Parliament, or how can we work with, potential private sector companies? Maybe it's pro bono support here you need, maybe it's networking. So it's a whole approach, and it is quite complicated. And I think there is a tendency to, I think you mentioned earlier, to see this as a buzz, an easy win, but it's really not.
Yeah.
In reality, there are lots of issues there which need to be looked at and supported.
Yeah. So as the main obstacles is possibly the complexity of the system and the fact that it's very much hardware, it's very much R&D investment and a long-term project rather than a quick return.
I think from a UK perspective, I can only speak really from a UK perspective. I think, the seaweed has been a hugely important industry for thousands of years all across Southeast Asia and Indonesia, and it's a vital support industry there. But I think just from a UK lens on how I'm talking to stakeholders in the space, I think we need a huge amount of support if we want this to excel as an industry. And I think it's really unfair as well to put all the onus on the seaweed farmer as well. I think that's totally not fair because, again, if you look at the support which fintech companies get, or blockchain technologies, or VR companies, or metaverse, whatever, the AI, look how much money has been invested into AI for R&D financing. Now compare that and the risk appetite that corporates have when it comes to AI, compare that to the excuses and the leniency and the huge amount of risk which they're applying to things like seaweed farming, which has multiple benefits to society. And if we can do it successfully, will help us thrive as a civilization. And that is the unfair part which I'm seeing here, is that there's a lot of great talk out there at the moment, but the onus is on the seaweed farmers and the farmers themselves, when actually this is a collective industry. And we need to require the support from the institutions and the private sector capital to really understand, okay, what are the barriers? Here's how we're going to address them. Here's how we bring government in, and we move this forward together. Because unless we do that, we're going to still be talking about the same pitfalls and barriers in 5 or 6 years' time. And we've missed 5 or 6 years' time where we could be addressing vital climate, nature, biodiversity, and creating jobs as well for a lot of coastal communities in this country, which are highly deprived and are in desperate need of supporting livelihoods and getting more people into green jobs. And this discussion on seaweed farming, as far as I'm concerned, should be a really vital part of when we talk about green jobs, just as we talk about renewable energy. This is another vital industry which we should be talking about in the same bracket. It doesn't have to be this sort of niche, nice to have thing. This should be mainstream. And when we get there, and I think we can get there, I think it will be hugely exciting. And it will offer vast amounts of opportunities for people all across the country.
What do you see as the untapped potential or opportunity in this space in terms of making the investment landscape work? Is there anything that maybe is missing? I don't know, such as getting more support from local governments or getting certain areas of the private sector involved? Is there anything that would really help in your mind?
Well, yeah, again, I think that needs to be led from the seaweed farmers and where they see that. But yes, I think there's loads of stuff we can do. I think one of the powers of convening people, especially in Parliament, and having, I've done a lot of work with your party, Parliamentary Group for Oceans, and that's been a really great avenue into bringing together key stakeholders and really discussing these type of discussion points with members of Parliament and really helping them understand the process. But I think we also need industry involved there as well, and investment, private sector, the finance industry, the insurance industry, those sort of powerhouses in the FGMC, businesses as well. And it's been great to see Nestle, for example, have been funding, by a stimulant program. I think that's a great first step. I think then there is more which the big FGMC companies can also trial and validate these different approaches. And also working, I think in the UK as well, we need to, there's a lot of work with stakeholders, which is really fundamental to this. The fishing communities, the boating communities, the leisure industry, the tourism industry, communities themselves, and really trying to agree a sustainable framework, moving forward. So yeah, I think convening and building a framework for what the seaweed industry could look like. And I know there is work ongoing to do that, which is really great to see. But I think more maybe bringing in more finance institutions and funders to really understand that, this is the type of capital we need and the returns will come once the infrastructure and the market has been established.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's not an easy area for sure. It's quite complex and a lot of moving parts. But yeah, I totally take your point that a lot more can be done. I think it's a good time to bring this to a close. But before we bring this to a close, it gives us an opportunity to tell people where to find you online, which is around social media. You seem to be quite active on LinkedIn. And do you use any other platform other than LinkedIn?
Not really. No, I'm pretty terrible, to be honest. We do have an Instagram page, which is on there. And we do have Twitter somewhere along the line, but I haven't updated it for a while. But the LinkedIn is, yeah, we use that as our main outreach. It's, fabulous tool. I think it's really great to see seaweed farmers using it as well. Their storytelling and their comms pieces are fantastic.
Have you noticed any particular strategy that has proven to be quite useful in using LinkedIn and building your whether it's your personal brand, which I have to say is quite strong at the moment in terms of you're quite visible, quite well known in the space,
I think one of the
and
great
as well
things,
as your company as well.
yeah, I think one of the great things about the ocean is that it's the mystery of it, and that to a lot of people, for us, we've been working on seaweed for years, but for a lot of people in private sector firms, they never even heard of the application of seaweed, and that's why I think it's great, like Vincent is doing, through the seaweed revolution, and the work he's been as an ambassador for seaweed is a vital stage in promoting those opportunities and those sustainable leverages that it has. Yeah, I honestly find, I think it would be really interesting to take more people out to see seaweed farms in real life. I think bringing people on boats, going out there and seeing a seaweed farm, giving them a really life experience and helping them understand that this is a vital, well, it could be a vital part of our economy here in the UK, and here's all the benefits that it provides. So LinkedIn is a really good bridge to that. It's a really good raising awareness tool. Yeah, we really enjoy using it. I think it's a powerful tool to use.
No, definitely. If you could take somebody on a boat, show them a seaweed farm, does anybody in particular come to mind, or any type of person, perhaps?
It'd be great to take all of the CEOs of the leading financial institutions and the leading companies in the world. Maybe the top FTSE 100 companies, where we could organise for all the CEOs to come out and visit a seaweed farm.
Get them out there.
Each put, 10 million in, and that money could be distributed to seaweed farmers as a bit of capital growth money.
Absolutely, that'd be fantastic. Harry, do you have any final message or a call to action for the audience?
No, not at all. I just want to say I've really enjoyed this, and I think again, like avenues like yourselves, having these discussions and speaking about what we need to do is a really great way of educating. And there are a lot of challenges in it, but the potential for seaweed is transformative. It's massive. And I even read that they're using seaweed for electric vehicle batteries in Hawaii. Now, I don't know, I need to look at that more in more detail, but can you imagine if we didn't have to mine the bottom of the sea, we could actually use seaweed for electric vehicle batteries. So
that'd be fantastic. Something we need to look into for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the future, if we can get it right, is a future of seaweed. So yeah, really, I mean, I love working in this space, so it's been a privilege for me to be part of this community.
Do you have any event in the calendar, any conference you're planning to attend?
Yes, we're running an event actually on, if any of your listeners want to come along, on the 4th of March at the House of Commons.
I'm not sure we're going to be able to publish the episode by then,
Okay.
but otherwise, is there anything further, because it's quite tight, further into the future, perhaps?
Yeah, there's the Lisbon.
If nothing comes to mind, doesn't matter.
No, don't worry, there's plenty. Yeah, there's the Lisbon Ocean Economist Conference in March, then Monaco Ocean Week which I'm hoping to attend in March. Then Barcelona in April for the UN Decade of Ocean Restoration, I think it's
Oh
called.
yeah.
And then there's some really interesting regenerative farming land-based conferences, so Groundswell, which is either in June or July. That's really cool. Then there's another sustainable agriculture one in May. So plenty. I mean, there's so many now. There's so many good ones. There's a really good one in Boston in March on sustainable seafood, which is really worth going to. And yeah, tons. I mean, we're running our pitching event in May as well, Barclays. So yeah, lots to do. Lots to do.
Very cool. Yeah. We'll put some links to the show notes for all of those, as many as we can. And I might see you on some of those if you
That'd be
if you're gonna
great.
be there.
Love to see you
Yeah.
there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for taking the time, and thank you guys for listening. Until next time, take care.